Welcome, guys, to those of you live and recorded. This is week 4 of research writing. Let us start by sharing our screen, as always. Hope you guys are staying nice and comfortable where you are. Okay. All right, module 4, which means that you have made it past halfway. That's always really useful and happy, right? Make this a little higher. So you're not. There, it's a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to start with the Module 4 overview, as we always do. Now, this Module 4 overview, you'll be happy to know, has less things to click, right? So when you look through this overview, it's going to take you less time than normal to get through. Of course, that just means that your work this week is going to be in other ways. So our weekly schedule pacing is actually a little bit different than normal. You can see that today is actually Tuesday, but Monday you should have already prepared by doing some of the reading, which we will be going over. Reminding you about that synthesis matrix, which we talked about, and we'll talk about that again. The preparation for the interview is going to be the biggest thing that you have this week, right? And preparing, like, how do I do this? Interviewing for some people is sort of a natural skill. For other people, like most of us, it is not. It's a little bit harder to do than it sounds. To ask good questions, to elicit the kinds of questions and answers that you're hoping that come out of someone. It's not only harder to do the interview, but it's also hard to be an interviewee. It can be nerve-wracking, right? So you have to not only ask good questions, but help make that person comfortable enough to talk to you. That takes a little bit of figuring things out, right? By Wednesday, of course, you're preparing again for that interview. You're doing some more stuff. You're continuing to collect secondary sources for your matrix. Then you're conducting that interview, making sure that you sign the consent form, and then notice something missing here, which you'll probably be happy about. There is no discussion board this week. So that's one big difference this week, and that's because you're busy doing other things in other interactions. Notice you are going to transcribe the interview. Before I forget, let me show you something here. Most of you are going to be using Microsoft Word. So we're just going to pull up a random document. Okay, so here is a document that we have that I have written for something else. But let's say that I don't have anything here. So let's pretend that we get rid of all words and we're starting with this blank document, right? So nothing here. But I've told you have to transcribe an interview. And you're thinking, well, how do I do that? So you have recorded your interview. So you'll have some of it will be, if you're lucky, you'll have very clear questions, very clear answers. But in the dictation of it, notice, and if you're in Microsoft Word, if you go right here, you're going to see this little dictate mic. Maybe you haven't used that before. If you click on that mic, now I am going to start talking, period. Let's say, comma, that I have put together something that's an interview, and I'm playing the recording, and the recorder is spewing out all these words. Now let's see what happens if I play it. You can see that Microsoft Word is going to just put everything down that I say or that it thinks I say on this document until I click it off again. And as you can see, there are going to be some things you're going to have to go back and tweak. The other thing I'm going to have to go back and do is something along this line. I'm going to cap and I'm going to say question and then type in the question. So again, I could dictate. Question number 1 is, what is your name? I'm going to probably go back over here and type in answer, right? Okay, so when you send the document to me, it should be very clear that which are the questions and which are the answers. Sometimes you'll see that questions are bolded and answers are not, to differentiate between the two things. Okay, so you can use this as a way to make it a little easier on yourself to transcribe that document from the auditory thing into your actual document that you're going to send to me. Okay, so just a little tip. You don't have to do it that way, but you can. Okay, let's go through this a little bit more. The reading you had to do was only one thing today, which is great, right? Annoying Ways People Use Sources by Kyle Stedman. We are going to make that a little easier on you. And see if I can find it. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video to help you with this idea. Here we go.
Called Annoying Ways People Use Sources. It's not meant to insult you, but it is meant to show you that sometimes when readers are reading your stuff, they get annoyed when you don't follow little bitty conventions. So sometimes it can make you look bad. I'm going to, in a lot of places, quote from this awesome book by Derek Bell called Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism. At the end of the book, he tells this hypothetical story in which he hypothesizes that if aliens came down to the United States and said, we will fix all kinds of your American social problems for one condition, if you give us all the African Americans in the country and let us take them away into space to do whatever we want with them. And his hypothesis is that if that happened, white American leaders would agree to the trade. So if you're confused by some of these quotes, that's what it's referring to. Check the
So you can see we've chosen a bit of a ridiculous thing to use for sources, but to show you the annoying way people use sources.
You'll notice in the slideshow that I'll occasionally highlight things in yellow, which means look especially at this annoying part of the sentence, and then I'll explain the problem in red, and then I'll fix them in blue. It's so calming, nice. The first kind of annoying thing I want to talk about is the dead dog in the road quotation. You experience this, right? There's a dead dog in the road, and if you went over it, it'd be like, boom, boom. And whoa, where did that come from? What was going on there? Well, I think it's the same when a quotation is dropped in with no explanation or introduction at all. Here's an example from my hypothetical paper. If aliens from outer space came to America, they might have things we need. Boom, boom. Whoa, suddenly we're in a quote. Where did this quote come from? You didn't set the quote up for me at all. Well, the way to fix that is really pretty easy. You just have to change the first sentence so it introduces the idea, introduces the writer that you actually are going to quote. Here's what it might look like. Oh, Derek Bell describes a situation in which aliens from outer space came to America carrying helpful supplies. He writes, oh, that's so nice. I knew what was coming up in the quote. It was introduced. No longer was it a dead dog in the road. It was a smooth river bend. I don't know, something like that. The next annoying thing is the fancy dinner quotation. I call it that when a quotation is introduced with an unnecessary colon or comma. You know how if you're having a fancy dinner, you've had all this extra fancy stuff that you don't really need on the table. For example, see that highlighted colon there? That's fancy. You don't need it. It's actually grammatically wrong there. Here's another one. Ooh, unnecessary. Why are you putting all this fancy stuff out? Let's just have normal, plain punctuation the way it should be. Let me break that down a little. When you introduce a quotation with a word like writes, says, explains, describes, just use a comma. Here's the annoying one that you saw a second ago. But look, here's how it's fixed. Oh, so nice. Explains, comma. That's the way it should be. It's not annoying. It's perfectly nice. Our second example that we saw a second ago is when you introduce a quote with the word that. You almost never need a comma. It's just a really common way that people write a lot of times. I know it's annoying. Here was our annoying one, extra fancy. See that little comma? It's like putting out a gilded silver.
I'm going to pause just for a second because you're absorbing all this information and thinking about using quotations. The reason or purpose for using the quotations is going to be after you collect the secondary sources and the interview, then you're going to be doing something with those quotations. So this is explaining to you eventually how you're going to use them.
Brady boat. But here it is fixed without the comma. It explains that. Oh, it's so nice. You just want to sit down and sit around the table and eat pizza all night or hummus. I don't know. Okay. They keep on driving until you end up in a ditch quotation where it makes a run-on sentence. This is the kind of quotation where I'm moving along in a sentence and I think it's going to stop and I don't think it's going to stop and it doesn't stop and it doesn't stop and it just keeps on going until it ends up in a ditch. Bell describes a situation where these aliens make a startling demand, comma, you just said an entire sentence. You can't end an entire sentence with a comma. Now you might say, wait, you just said a second ago you should use commas before quotations. Well, not always. In this situation, the first part before the quotation is a complete sentence. So it feels like a run-on. It actually is a run-on. It's a comma splice, if you want to look that up. Here is some explanation. When your introductory sentence makes a complete sentence and doesn't end with one of those verbs we talked about in the last one, use a colon to introduce the quotation. And here's a little hint. You're almost always going to use a colon to introduce a long block quotation. You know, one of those quotes that you indent a little bit on the left. Here's an example. We changed that comma to a colon here, and suddenly it grammatically, mechanically works. This is a correct sentence. No longer is this an annoying grabs my attention away from the topic of your paper. You should know that. Okay, quick review. I know that was a lot of stuff just dumped on you. If your sentence leading up to the quotation ends with right, says, explains, one of those verbs, use a comma before it. But if the last word is a that, don't use any punctuation. Just say that and move it straight into the quote. But if the last word doesn't fit into one of those above options and there's a complete sentence for the quote, use a colon. Now that isn't going to take every single situation, but those are three things that it's good to keep in mind, so that when you see something that breaks one of these two rules, you'll know it.
Let me pause real quickly, just in case you want to take a picture of that recap. So there you go. If you want that picture, moving on.
Okay. The I cuss in the movie theater when I sit next to young children, comma. This came from an actual experience of mine. I was in a movie theater and I was sitting next to or behind two teenagers, and one said to another, hey, you better not cuss. There's a little kid right next to me on the other side. And the other cussing kid said, no way, I am a cusser and there's nothing I can do to stop myself. So that kid had just better deal with my cussing. I couldn't really believe it. I was a little shocked. So that cusser was taking the stance that no matter what the situation, I am always going to act exactly the same. And sometimes I think people place commas in the same way, as if my comma will always go in the same place, no matter what. That's just how it is. When really you have to adjust a little bit sometimes. Here's the situation. Notice here at the end of this sentence, there's a period and it's outside of the quotation mark. And you might say, that's perfectly right. It is perfectly right. This is a great period placement. You're following the rules when you use a citation. So that person says, I don't care what I'm going to do. I always put my punctuation outside the quote, so I'm going to do it here too after offer. Well, that person is being like the movie theater cusser. Here's the thing. When there's no parenthetical citation, commas and periods always go inside quotation marks. This is a really easy rule. It's complicated if you start reading stuff published in the UK because in Britain they do things differently. Oh well. For us, we always put them inside unless there's some kind of a citation there. Here's what I mean. Space traders offer, comma, quotation mark. See how I moved it inside? So you're going to have to deal with the fact that sometimes commas go inside and sometimes they go outside. Commas over periods. Now this is different with question marks and exclamation points and things like that. Look it up. Next, the I swear I did some research paraphrase. This is a citation where I get the feeling that the student writer is trying to say, look, I used this source. I promise, I swear. But I'm like, where did you use it? What did you use it for? Here's an example. Here's three lovely sentences that the student essay has. Okay, great. These are all good sentences, making an interesting point. But then look at this kind of random citation at the end. What exactly came from Bell, page 160? Is it this first part? It's possible that is it the second part? Is it the third part? Is it the second and third? I'm baffled. To me, it looks like he wrote these three great sentences and said, I guess I kind of read Bell when I kind of wrote this, so I'll kind of drop it in. Okay, here's the thing. Always when you're using a paraphrase.
Let's pause for just a second in case you are confused. citations tell us where things came from, right? So when you use a quote, an exact quote, you always include a citation telling us where it came from. But sometimes you also cite a paraphrase, as he's talking about here. And a paraphrase is doing something in your own words. But if you are still paraphrasing a fact, a story, something that is very specific to one particular source. It's not in all the sources. It's really only one. Maybe it's the story of Johnny. But you're still paraphrasing it in your own words. You're still wanting to tell us where you found that information, right? So even though it's a paraphrase, you're telling us, I found this story, I found this fact, this information from this source. So I'm going to include a citation.
When you're not using a quotation, in other words, it's crucial that you let your readers know what came from the source you're quoting, or paraphrasing, I'm sorry, and what came from yourself. Here's a way to do that. Two simple little additions. I added in I find that, so that it's very clear that this sentence came from me, the writer. And then Bell explains that, oh, now it's totally clear what came from him. It turns out it was only that third sentence. Who knew? I had no way of knowing before. I think this is the last one. The I had to work, so my reader should too. This is when a writer is like, hey, I've been working so hard on this essay, I don't care if I make it easy for my reader. Well,
and one little reminder, even though this particular person is using works cited, meaning MLA stuff, we are going to be using APA, right? So keep that in mind that the APA looks a little bit different.
Get over yourself. Come on. That's annoying. Here's an example. When the president discusses the issue with his cabinet, it's clearly has already made up his mind. Faces. This writer says, I'll just somehow mention the thing that I'm quoting from, and that'll be good enough. As long as I mention it, they'll be able to find it. Well, you're making work hard for us. The way that readers read citations is we look at this and we say faces. Okay, I'm going to go to the F section of the works cited page and find it there. Works cited F section. Wait, there is no F section. I'm totally baffled. Well, that's because the first thing on the works cited list from this source is Bell.
And that would be the same for APA as well. The only difference up here in the citation for APA would say Bell, comma, 1992, because APA includes the date, comma, page 160, right? So that's how it would look in APA.
That means that Bell is what needs to go inside here. I basically just said all this. Extra. This is often an issue. In other words, people often mess this up with websites. It's really common for people to want to put the actual web address in there, but according to MLA format, you actually put
and APA format
the last name of the author, or perhaps it would be the title of the article. It's whatever the first thing that you find on that works cited entry. So here's how that one we just looked at would be fixed. If you're baffled and I went over that too fast for this.
And again, for APA, it would be Bell, comma, 1992, comma, page 160.
For any of these, look it up. Hey, it's not that hard. The lesson here is don't be annoying.
Okay, so that gives you some of the main things from the Stedman that you read. So let's go back over here to the Stedman. Annoying Way People Use Sources by Kyle Stedman. And that little video kind of highlights a couple of the more important and more misused annoying things. Okay, so moving forward, again, notice there's no discussion for this. So yay, you can celebrate that. All right, so the synthesis matrix, we've gone over this in the past, but this is really a way of making your research work better. So actually, let me pull up the matrix. I think we have it here. No, I do not have it up here. See if I can find it. I don't have it. The matrix, as you recall, here we go. Okay, synthesis matrix. Let me make it a little bigger here if I can. This is a completed one. Of course, yours is going to look different. It's going to have different topics across the top because your topics will be different. So you might have introduction and background information, but then most of these others are going to be more applicable to whatever your topic's going to be, whatever you're researching. On this side over here, you're going to have all the sources. Those are the secondary sources you've collected. You might also include as one of your sources the interview source over here. And again, it's just a way of collecting the information so that you can see it. And to make that a little better, a little easier, I have a quick little video that kind of helps you how this is working. Now, keep in mind that a literature review is a very academic and collegiate sort of thing, right? You're collecting a bunch of literature sources and trying to understand this topic. This is also a form that you may want to use in business, especially for something where you like maybe artificial intelligence is a really good example of that, where something comes along and is going to change the way your job works, perhaps, right? So like maybe you want to look at, okay, what are other people saying about this new thing called artificial intelligence, and am I supposed to use Chat GPT or Chat GP4 or Discord, or what am I supposed to use, or should I use any of them? And maybe you want to put all these things in a matrix and ask the questions. What are the pros and cons of all of these sort of things? So a matrix just helps you to corral information of any kind. So here we go.
Here is to talk about literature review, the synthesis matrix, and how these two things are connected. This is going to be relevant in the first part of your APA unit, gaps on educational research, particularly where we are writing our literature reviews and identifying the gaps in the research that we find. So, first question is, what is a literature review? Really, it is just a summary of what your research says, and it is not organized source by source. It is organized topic by topic. It shows how ideas from your research overlap with each other. So maybe you're noticing that more than one of your sources agree and they're saying the same thing. You would want to emphasize that in your literature review. Maybe you're noticing that your sources are debating with each other. It could be directly debating. One author references the other source.
Also, it could be that as you're collecting this information in the matrix and you're looking at how sources agree or disagree with one another, this helps you to come up with good questions for your interview.
They say something like, this source says this, I disagree, I think something else. So it could be some kind of direct debate, or it could be an indirect debate. You have two sources that conflict with their thinking. One source talks about one thing, another source says something completely different. So maybe there's a debate there that's direct or indirect, and you would want your literature review to showcase that as well. Or maybe there's some kind of qualification happening. So maybe one source is providing an idea, and then another one of your sources is furthering or qualifying that idea. And again, these types of overlaps between your sources can be direct, where sources are actually referencing other sources that you found, or they can be indirect, where the ideas are there, but they're not necessarily calling out one particular source that you have. So the point of a literature review is to summarize that content. And again, what's very important is that your literature review does not
as I'm in the midst of applying for residency.
And we always have the ads,
right now.
right?
Wish me luck. Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application.
Go or is not structured source by source. A structure of source by source would be, first you write a paragraph summarizing one of your sources. Then you have another paragraph summarizing another source. That is not what I want you to do. The literature review should synthesize those ideas and show how they are overlapping. So they will be structured, the literature review will be structured topic by topic. One paragraph talks about one topic, shows how all of the sources are discussing that topic and what they're saying about it. Move on to a new paragraph where you have a new topic, what sources talk about that topic and what they have to say. And that's the point of your literature review, is to showcase someone else's ideas. So what is a synthesis matrix? Synthesis matrix is a table that organizes ideas source by source and topic by topic. So what you can see here is sort of a spreadsheet, table, grid, however you want to think about it. The reason that we do a synthesis matrix is because sometimes we have sources that are so dense, so heavy, and they cover so many different minute details of their topic or their idea that it can be difficult to pull out exactly what that source is saying about something specific. When you start to break down the topics a source talks about and identify, okay, in pages 1 through 3, it covers this content. Then it switches focuses and moves on to something new. When you break down what it is your source is saying about the various topics that it covers, kind of like outlining the source, so to speak, it's easier to see what information is present, and it makes it a lot easier to summarize just the relevant information if you're going to explain how that information is connected to the relevant information in another source. So really the whole point of a synthesis matrix is a way to visually organize information that you're finding in a source in a more meaningful way so that you can write a report or a literature review. You can identify redundancies in sources where maybe multiple sources are saying the same things, and especially for our purposes, helps you identify some gaps in the research that you found. Okay. How do you create a synthesis matrix?
Which, of course, if you find the gaps, that's the goal. And that might tell you, oh no, there's a gap here. I need to know more about this. So I better go find another source, or I better ask my interview about that particular topic that's a gap so I can fill it and see if I can figure out what's going on here.
First, you need all your sources. You can create a synthesis matrix as you're researching, but if you found all your sources, you want to just collect those all in one spot. Open them all up on tabs on your browser, print them all out, and have them with you. And then you want to create a table with one extra row than the number of sources you have. So if you have 3 sources, you need 4 rows. If you have 4 sources, you need a table with 5 rows. 5 sources, you need 6 rows. How many columns does your table need? Well, that kind of depends on the number of topics you're going to cover in your literature review. So if you are covering 3 topics in your literature review, then you need 4 columns, because you need a column to house the titles of all of your sources. So why don't we take a look? Here's what a synthesis matrix will look like once you've identified your sources and the number of topics that you want to talk about in your literature review. So you're going to put all of your sources on the very left column. You might put the title of the source, the author, maybe a link to find the source quickly. And then you want to identify some key topics that your sources talk about. There might be a source that doesn't address a topic. That's fine. You should still put it as one of your column headers. There might be a couple of sources that don't address a topic, but what are some of the big topics collectively that most of your sources are talking about? You want to identify that information in the very top row of your synthesis matrix.
Switch to Chrome to protect yourself from malware.
Okay, and that I think gives you a pretty good idea of what you might be able to do with the synthesis matrix that may not be just for this class, but also might be useful in your organization of your ideas in your business or your life or your family or anything else that you're trying to do, right? Okay, so it's a skill set that we're working with. All right, so keeping in mind the interview materials, here they are located, right? So the consent form, don't forget you need to provide consent. Have whomever is going to be your interviewee sign that says, hey, I know what I'm doing this for. It's for this class for research for Indiana Tech. There's also a copy of the project itself there. So if you want to see the overview again, and the reflection for it as well. So those are the things you're going to be turning in Module 6. Notice this is Module 4. So these are all the things that you're working on this week, next week, and the following, right? The audio stuff. Most of you are going to use your smartphone to do the audio interview. It tells you what kinds of audio files you can upload into Canvas. These are the ones. If you're like me and you don't really know exactly what all of those things mean, you don't really have to. That's the good news. You're going to use one of these particular 2 audio files, you're going to be fine. If you're not using one of those, and you're going into, say, if you're in an iPhone and you're going over to the App Store, or an Android would be slightly different, it'll tell you as you're searching through, just search for free audio or free transcriber, free any of those kinds of things you're going to find. In the description, it's going to tell you the kind of audio file it produces. So just make sure that you are getting one of those, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to upload it and you'll lose some points. So that will not make you happy, right? Okay, so be prepared for that small little piece. All right, and of course, there's always the live tech stuff that you need to do for after you watch this. Now, I want to circle back more to the good interview stuff, and I want to take a look at how to be and how to perform a good interview. So there's 2 things I want you to take a look at. One, a really famous interviewer is Katie Couric, maybe a little earlier for some of you, that she takes a few minutes to describe how to do a good interview. So let's take a look and see what she says.
Hey YouTube, I'm Tony Masillas. I'm a producer here at the CBS Evening News, and I have the pleasure of working with Katie Couric on a very regular basis.
Pleasure.
It's a pleasure. And you're obviously known for your interview skills. So there's this new channel at YouTube called the Reporter Center, and they wanted us to just ask you a few questions about what makes a good interview.
Okay.
So maybe the first question would be, what makes somebody a good interviewer?
Well, I think it's really important, Tony, to be a gracious host, because I think the more comfortable you make someone feel, the better interview you'll ultimately get. So I know that in terms of body language, I always try to be very warm and welcoming, and I think it's really critical to put someone at ease. I think also you have to calibrate your tone depending on what interview you're doing. If I'm talking to David Duke about, anti-Semitism or racism, obviously I'll have a very different tone. I'll be much more pugnacious than I would be when I'm talking to someone who may have suffered a personal tragedy. So I think it's really important to be very empathetic in some cases, and then to know when you're going to be loaded for bear and really try to elicit important information from someone who may be a bit oily and not direct in answering your questions.
How do you prepare for an interview?
Well, I try to do a combination of explaining what I can in the body of the question without going on and on. And I try to ask questions, obviously, that don't require a yes or no answer, because that's a disaster, because you're left kind of with a lot of dead air. And depending on who I'm talking to, I fashion my questions that way. And I sometimes go through them and think, well, how is this person likely to answer this? And what would be an appropriate follow-up? And knowing what they've said in previous interviews or their positions on various issues, I think, well, how can I go at this another way? Sometimes it happens spontaneously, obviously, when someone doesn't answer your questions. But at other times, I think you can predict appropriate follow-up questions.
It might sound a little bit Captain Obvious, but listening is probably really important, right?
Very, very. Nothing is worse for me than as a viewer to watch someone go down a laundry list of questions and not explore something with a little more depth after someone has answered a question already. To not pick up on something, maybe an inconsistency or something that may be news, and follow up on that and use that as the springboard to go into a whole different area. I think you need to use your questions as sort of a template but you have to be willing to listen, as you said, Tony, and really veer off in a totally different direction. I can't stand it when people don't have the ability to do that. I'm like, it makes me crazy.
Now, that being said, have you ever had an interview go pretty far south on you where you're sitting there like, what do I do now?
Yeah, well, it is hard. Sometimes people freeze. Sometimes they're just cranky. I had an actor who I interviewed, who shall remain nameless, who just didn't want to be bothered. It really annoyed me because I was giving him a lot of time on national television, and he clearly didn't want to be there. But I one member of the Flying Walendas, I know. Why was I interviewing them? This woman answered every question with a monosyllabic answer, and it was very frustrating to kind of get her to elaborate. And then Bobcat Goldthwait, the comedian, I sort of missed the memo that he screamed, so I kept asking him, "Why are you yelling at me?" And I didn't realize stupidly that was part of his shtick. That was
Did you know who he was?
Really embarrassing. I kind of knew a little bit about who he was. Now I certainly know all about him.
Oh, well, I'm sure you do the hard way, right?
Yeah,
You learned
exactly.
about Bob.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any last minute tips that you want to give to people? Anything that anybody starting out in the business might want to know?
Well, I think you should remember who you're serving, your audience. You're trying to inform them. You're trying to illuminate a certain subject, enlighten people. And I think you need to keep that in mind. This isn't a self-aggrandizing exercise about how much you know. It's not an opportunity for a gotcha moment. I think it's really to shed some light on how someone thinks and their position, and to allow them to communicate. And I think if you allow your interview subject to communicate whatever message he or she might have at that moment, then you've done an effective job.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's time for me to get back to other.
Okay, so that's one perspective on doing an interview. So she does a pretty good job of giving you some basic stuff, some ideas, some hints. But here is another way of doing this. And you may want to watch this and write a few things down for yourself or take a couple of photos to remind yourself how to do this. So again, simple techniques for doing an effective interview.
Okay, you're going to conduct an interview, either audio or video. You probably want to know a few things and plan it out. Here's 5 tips that you need to know before you actually start doing that. So you're going to sit down and you're going to go, "Oh, hey, dude, I just wanted to say, how's it going? And how you doing? And what's your name again?" No, you want to research the person before you actually do the interview, because then you don't know anything. Plus, the person you're researching will be like, "Hey, this guy knows what he's talking about." Go up on Google, look at their LinkedIn profile. Are you connected in any way? Did you make similar videos? Did you attend the same college? Did you go?
Or if it happens to be somebody that's related to you, you might be surprised at how much you don't know about them as well. Ask around. If you're interviewing your grandparent, for example, ask around to other people in the family and get a better understanding of what they might know.
Go to the same university? Do you drink coffee at the same coffee shop? Who the hell knows? You got to research it. If the person works for a company, then you should research the company, see what they do, see what they contribute, see what their job is, see how the company's doing, see how big they are, see what their interests are. That's what they're going to be interested in. Do your research. A lot of times you'll just email back and forth. "Hey, I want to ask these questions," and they'll say, "Okay, that's cool," and prep for this and prep for this. You're prepping the other person too. They just show up and go, "Hi, I'm here for an interview. What are you going to ask me?" When you were in 10th grade, no, there's going to be research and emails back and forth. You can use a tool for that. There's a tool called Clearbit, and it'll help you fill in all the blanks. Okay, next you got your person, right? And you're talking back and forth. We're going to interview about this. We're going to stay on this subject, and we're not going to touch this subject. Cool. Now you need to figure out, let's go shoot. No, you need a location. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to sit? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be in some dark alley someplace? I think not. You want something that has zero background noise, looks nice, and you'll never be interrupted. Right. Outer space. That's usually not the case. You're going to need to find a location. You're going to need to deal with certain things that come up while you're doing the interview and during the interview. So instead of obsessing over this perfect location, find some place will be it'll be semi-quiet. You won't be interrupted. There won't be someone coming in the door and interrupting this person every time. You do want to shoot around restaurants and everything else. You're going to need to take extra efforts to make sure they're mic'd properly and everything else. But if you're interviewing a restaurant owner, sure, shoot them in the restaurant. Just watch the noise level. Another good place to interview the person is in their office. You're going to have to do some cleanup and stuff like that, or a coffee shop, or a park, or like somewhere that's just kind of neutral and there's not a lot of stuff going on. Now, maybe you can't meet in person. Well, tools like Zoom allow you to conference, and you can piece these together and make it look like there's something going on, or just present that you're conferencing with this person. You can even book a conference room or get a quiet place in your own house where you won't be interrupted. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're interviewing some dude and phone's ringing and people coming in and knocking and stuff's going on and they have a coffee machine sitting there and people are coming and getting coffee, it's just not going to be cool. You just think it through, man. Think it through. Like, nice and easy and quiet and whatever. The other thing about location shooting is no one ever does this, and I don't get it. Why don't you do this? Hang some signs out there. Recording on the air. Don't interrupt. Knock and die. That's a good one. Now you're going to conduct this interview, and maybe you were going back and forth, but you want like 10 questions, open-ended, that you want to ask the person. Hey, tell me about your company. Where'd you grow up? Can you tell me more about your passions in life? Just open-ended questions that the person could talk about. And you want to be prepared. I mean, if you're going back and forth, this guy shows up, and he's all ready to talk, and you're like, well, blah, 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 and I want to do this, and then we're going to do the interview, and and you're just talking and talking. It's not an interview, that's you talking. Let the person talk. Ask them a question. Let them answer the question. You can always cut the stuff out later. Just put your open-ended questions down somewhere. You can use Google Docs. You can use Evernote. You can use an actual pad of paper with this thing called a pencil. I know it's old technology, but it still works. The other cool thing is you can end an interview and say, do you have any questions for me? The person might ask you a question that you answer and may open up a whole new dialogue and all sorts of crunchy nuggets of information. Now, if you're doing this interview and you're sitting there with a notepad and you're scribbling and the person's answering and you're doing this, they're not going to be engaged. It's not going to be fun. You're going to be your pencil breaks. Don't do that. So you're going to want to record the interview that's occurring. One way is use your iPhone or your whatever phone you have. Put it on Do Not Disturb and then just start the recording and get it close to the people so you have it really interview recorded. Another way is buy an audio recorder. I mean, we did a whole thing on audio recorders, big long thing on audio recorders that'll show you the right audio recorder to use. Yeah, do that. If you're going to interview over the phone, you can use remote call recorder apps. I think Rev has one. You can also make a Zoom call and use their free recording feature. Hey, look, if you're going to record someone, you really need to ask their permission if it's okay to record them. But if you're doing an interview and it's all set up, they know you're setting down. But if you're going to go up to someone and say, hey, I want to ask you some questions, and you hit a recorder and you don't tell them, when you're done with the interview, you need to transcribe that into the written material for the blog post or whatever you happen to be doing. Boy, no journalist ever said this. I can't wait to get home and transcribe this interview. Yeah. Research, interviews, and transcriptions, these are really the most important parts of a journalist's work. Do what I've told you to do. Research the person you're going to interview or the subject you're going to interview, then do the interview, record it in some way, and then get it transcribed. Who could transcribe that? PBS NewsHour, This American Life, The Wolf.
There we go. I can stump it. I can. I promise. Okay, so you have a lot of information that you are now, right, focusing on all through your entire brain. You have a lot of stuff happening. I want to pause for a quick second to see if anybody here has a question that's live. Okay, no questions. That's usually the case, but let's take a little bit of time. I don't want to end too early, but I also want to value your time. So I'm going to stop my thoughts at this moment so that you can go and get that interview done, right? I will stay here in case someone pops back in and wants to ask a question. So you guys have a fantastic week 4.